5-minute warning, 5-minute warning.
Cedar. Try Cedar. Did I hear from the other room a 5-minute warning a minute ago?
Yeah, it's about 35 seconds or so. I don't know if they have anything else.
All right, we'll see.
Hey gang, the fellowship is great, and I've really enjoyed hearing all of the conversation and the fun that you're having and sharing information with each other. But to move forward and to get you out of here, because I know people have got evenings and things that they got to do, we're going to start back. So Stephen?
Wonderful. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed lunch. After lunch is always hard. All right, so we're going to start with keeping you moving a little bit here as we get started. Before we jump into, you're going to get around your tables here in just a minute and have a little bit of conversation about some things that we just finished talking about right before lunch. But before we do that, I want to remind you, right, of our ground rules. Okay, because we're going to start to wade into some waters for the next little bit that are potentially contentious. All right, and here's what I mean by that. Not because you all don't like one another, but because we're starting to talk about methods. And the reality is, different people have different perspectives on methods. And from what I understand, in the economy of God, that's okay. I think it's okay to have some distinctions around methods. And so I want to remind you, be gracious with one another, right? Be vulnerable, but don't expect vulnerability to the same degree from everybody else. And let's make sure we keep remembering, right? This is a process, right? But that middle ground rule is really important for us as we wade into this next section here. Let's make sure, as God has been gracious with us, right? Anybody in here receive the grace of God? Receive grace from God? Amen, right? Let's do the same for others. All right, let's treat one another in that same vein. All right? So we just finished talking about this idea right here, that if we are going to connect the generations, if we're going to engage younger generations, there's three primary components that are really, really important for us. I'm also not arrogant enough to think that my research gave me the answer, right? These are some answers. Right? I recognize there's other factors, but these three components I think are really important, that your primary environments are designed in such a way that it connects the generations. There, it's not all catered to one generation, right? But older and younger, your primary environments are designed to actually connect both. Secondly, that you are giving opportunity for meaningful participation, that you're willing to share your leadership keys, right? I'm not a big fan of letting other people borrow my stuff, okay? I really like books, okay? And I've got a bunch of books in my office, and I've got this little stamp that I got several years ago that's got my name on it, and I punch that thing down when I hand somebody a book, right? Call it a trust issue, you can call it whatever you want, all right? But the reality is like sharing our stuff can be difficult, right? Giving away our things can be really, really challenging for us. But when we start talking about meaningful participation, what are you willing to give away? What roles and responsibilities, what opportunities for influence and leadership are you willing to share? Right? Now, it's irresponsible to share those things without any kind of development, and that's why this third component is really, really important. That there's got to be a mechanism to connect older and younger on a personal level. Right? On a personal level. We've heard it on a number of occasions, and several of you have talked about the importance of relationship. All of this really rises and falls on relationship. Right? Give opportunity, great. Change your environments, great. No relationship, people are probably going to be gone. Right? Relationship is crucial to this. And what we want to do is create a mechanism that lets the older and the younger connect on a personal level. It's really hard to say goodbye. There's some songs that have been written about this, right? It's really hard to say goodbye to somebody you love and somebody you know loves you. Right? Think about the hardest goodbyes you've ever had in your life. Probably weren't the ones that you only ever interacted in a crowd with. It's the people you shared life with. You went through valleys together. You celebrated things together. Where there's a personal relationship, right, it changes the game for connection. And we want to create mechanisms where people can connect from different generations on a personal level. When we do that, we demonstrate to others of a different generation than our own that we genuinely love them. We care about them. That we're invested in them. We genuinely have their interests in mind. And then, like I said, genuine love is awesome. Love's not a strategy, right? Love isn't a strategy. Right? So we've got to have a specific strategy tethered to it. And when we do that, it gives us the potential for engagement. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put some questions up. And really what we're going to look at is two sides of each of these three components, right? We're going to start with the primary environments, and I want you to think about your current status, your current practice within your primary environments. Again, typically we're talking about the thing, the place, the space, the environment that everybody is invited to, all like on a regular basis. So maybe it's a weekend worship service, whatever that primary environment is. My guess is that's going to be the thing that most of you are referring to there. But think about your current practice, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to flip that question to the potential, to what could be, right? So the first two questions I'm about to put up here, you're going to talk about these around your table, and it's going to be specific to your current practice, all right? And the two questions that you're going to look at first is this. What are you currently, or how are you currently using your primary environments to keep the generations together? So what are you currently doing to connect the generations in your primary environments? And then, connected to that, what are the current barriers to connection, generational connection in your primary environment? So what are you currently doing, and what are the barriers? Now, what I recognize is that for some of you, you don't have an answer to maybe one of these questions. It may be that you don't feel like you're doing anything in your current context. Or it may be that you feel like you're doing things, but there's no barriers. That things are going well and you're making progress and you feel like there's really no barriers in your current context as well. So we're talking current context, current practice, and then after we answer these two questions, we're going to start to talk about the future a little bit and begin asking questions about how you could do this. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions around it? I talked for way too long after lunch already, I can tell. All right, so jump around you'll get together around your tables. We're going to answer these two questions. Take about 5 minutes to do that. All right, about 1 more minute. 1 more minute. All right. All right. So I want to reference back to something that I said earlier about really how important some of what we're doing right now is. You are getting a chance, right? Not just at your tables now because of how some of you moved around earlier today, but in the room as a whole as well. This is a chance to learn from one another. So what we are going to find is that there's things that we're going to write down here as current practices. That for some of you, they're not current practices and are going to be in the potential practices category for you. So I want to encourage you to listen to one another really carefully over the next little bit because you're going to have the chance to learn some things from one another. And what you're going to find, I would imagine, is that for some of you, the questions about the potential in the future, what you could do, are actually going to be getting answered for you as you hear from one another about what some of you are currently doing. Does that make sense? So listen to one another, learn from one another. It's a great opportunity for us here. So let's do this. Let me hear from some of you. What are some of your current practices in your primary environment? Right now, I just want to focus on the current practices in primary environments. Let me ask this real quick. Your primary environments, are there any that you would call primary environments besides your weekend Sunday worship services? Do you have other environments? What?
Wednesday night Bible study.
So Bible studies or small groups, that's something that you're inviting everybody to, okay? Anything else? Okay, so really maybe those are our two categories. Our primary environments would be worship services, regular weekly worship services, and then maybe Bible studies or small groups or something like that everybody else is invited to. Okay. Yep. That's good too. Yep. So if everybody is invited to that happens on a regular basis, right? Those are the things that we're talking about. All right. So let's start with current practices. Those things that help connect the generations in primary environments. What do you have?
We have
Yeah. Go ahead.
We have a Sunday school class called Generations.
Okay.
That is one of the choices that people can make that has all generations. We do have the traditional.
That are age and stage, but you've also offer one class
That's
that's generations, that's open to anybody. And is that all adults only, or is that
It's all ages, anybody.
all age? So if a 10-year-old wanted to come with their mom, they could come.
Usually it'll be the age of maybe like, I would say 17 or 18 up.
Yep.
It's open to anyone.
Okay. So anybody else do anything like that where you offer a class or two maybe that for all generations? Great. That's good. What else? What are some other ideas? Yeah.
We do a mix of Christian and hymns.
Okay. So I'm going to write it this way up here, and then we're going to talk about that for a second, because isn't that everybody's favorite subject? Talking about the music in your services? Yeah. All right. I'm going to write this way, diversity of music. Now here's what I think can be unique for us. There are not just generational differences when it comes to music. There are cultural differences when it comes to music as well. Last night, my wife and I went to, I think you can call it a concert because they sang some songs, but there were five singer-songwriters that could kind of, basically, they consider themselves really, really good storytellers too. Has anybody ever heard of Andrew Peterson? Anybody in here ever heard of Andrew Peterson? He was one of the five. And it was a really neat night. We were talking about it on the way home last night. I've never been to anything like this. I've never been to a concert where there was more talking than music. But it was that way. But the last song that they did, which was by far the most engaging song, was very different culturally. And what I mean by that is it was not probably a song that most of us would, and I don't remember the name of it, it was a more traditional song, but it was gospel song. I mean, it was like, it had a very different feel to it than kind of the acoustic singer-songwriter feel that most of the other stuff was. And I was thinking to myself, why did more people participate and clap and stand up during that song than some of the others? Well, there's a different feel to different cultures of music, right? And so it's important for us to recognize when we talk about diversity of music choices, we're not just talking about, old hymns versus newer, praise choruses or songs or whatever. There's actually a whole nother dimension to that conversation. And when we talk about, and this is one of the things that I'm thankful for that you care deeply about, when we talk about diversity in churches, we are not just talking about generational diversity. Right? We're talking about cultural diversity as well. And music is one of those places where I think that can show up in some pretty significant ways. Right? Make sense? So, but some of you, how many of you try to diversify your music, even if it's just more of the generational diversity? But how many of you try to diversify your music in some ways? How many of you would say our music is not very diverse? Some of you probably feel that way. Yeah. Thank you for your being honest. I appreciate that. Right? And there's
Or you can't play it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we struggle with.
So here's the deal, and this is where, again, we start helping people connect on a personal level, older and younger. It provides an opportunity for them to do some of these things together, right? Because that older and younger, that personal level connection, the common thread that connects two people might be music, that they love music. And what if I sat down with somebody significantly older or younger than me, or just culturally different from me, and learned about their music, about their experiences, about some of their preferences around that? It's actually a chance for older and younger, different cultures to learn from one another, I think. But it's a real thing. The reality is some of it is you don't have the people that can do that, and that's a real thing. Right? Music can be done really well, and it can be done not so well. Okay, and we recognize that. We want to do the best we can with what we have every time. 100% agree with that. And so that can be a limiting factor for us at times, for sure. All right, let's move beyond music. What are some other ways that your primary environments are connecting generations? Yes? Huh. They love it when they're not invited into the question and they don't know the answer. That's good. That's good. But yeah, participation, inviting different people. Listen, just because something is a traditional practice doesn't mean it's bad. Y'all agree with that? Just because somebody's done the same thing for 50 years doesn't mean it's a bad thing. So I'm a big fan of take the best ideas and do them, whether they're brand new or hundreds of years old. Let's just do the best things. I think, honestly, one of my favorite things in some churches that I've been in is when there's a time that's specifically carved out to speak to the kids. You know what you've just said? We're glad you're in the room. You matter. We want you to participate. A church that I was a part of in Tennessee, and actually COVID, that shutdown season actually gave us this idea. When we were streaming our services online for a season, we started doing some things to help parents with younger kids. And so during the teaching time, we would have some things kind of either show up on the screen or the person teaching would say, hey kids, right now while we're talking about this, I want you to draw a picture of a cross to remind yourself of what we're talking about. You know what we said? We're glad you're a part of this. We're glad your kids are a part of this. Parents, we recognize this is hard for you. We want to help you. Right? Same thing happens in the room, right? When we engage kids in different ways, we're saying we're glad you're there. What were you going to say?
I think the other thing it does is that the kids usually have some things to say.
That's right.
And what's interesting is after the service, that the older generations will say something to the parents of the children, and it connects all three of the generations.
Wonderful.
At once, and I think it's interesting to see the conversations.
Yep.
It causes conversations to happen as well.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, right? It's a beautiful thing. How many of you do something like that in your context? Some of you? It's so funny because I can tell some of you are like, I think I want to put my hand up about this, but I'm not sure if I do. It's great. Just, hey, we're going to be honest with each other in here. All right? What else? What are some other practices, current practices?
Well, when we have usually kid, Easter egg hunt or trunk or treat, we try to do bingo or something for the not so young people. Just get them out there, get them involved with the younger kids. And then we also invite the helper to participate or run there.
Yeah. Yeah.
She had an adult Easter egg hunt this past time we had it.
Really?
Yeah, she did.
I want to hear about that later. That's it. I'm fascinated. Not because I'm basically just a kid that grew up a little bit. I like that. That sounds fun to me. Nobody gave me an Easter egg hunt this year. So, but I think when you do strategic events to engage people in your community, to just encourage your church, you give people a chance to actually participate that aren't just in that slice of kid, right? And so there's different ways to do that. Invite people to serve. Invite people to be a part of the process of preparing for it, right? You might have some of your senior adults help stuff plastic eggs for an Easter egg hunt. You might have some of them help at check-in. You might have some of them help put the eggs out, right? There are different ways to engage people in different generations. Let your students serve at an event like that. Or maybe it's a trunk or treat, right? And you've got different people representing different ages that are helping do your trunks or doing games and different things like that. Whatever it is, be creative about ways to do that. Because how many of you have ever been on a mission trip? We were talking about this at lunch. How many of you have ever been on a mission trip? How many of you came back with better relationships with those people than when you left? Every time it happens. Maybe not with everybody on the trip, but you usually come back with some better relationships, right? Why is it? Because when you serve together, you sacrifice something you love for something you love more together with other people. You know what you're doing? You're bonding on a level that's far deeper than, good morning, how you doing, Jim? Good. How you doing? Good. Our typical Sunday interactions. You bond on a whole different level. And so when you serve together at an event like that, you're actually providing kind of a mini experience that's just like that, a smaller experience that's just like that. So serving together across generations is a fantastic way to allow generations to connect. That's great. I saw a hand back here.
Our pastor lets a young person read the scripture.
Love it. So I'm going to put service elements, right? So it may be reading the scripture. It may be people that lead music. It may be someone that does a welcome. It might be whatever the elements are, right, in your different services. Someone sharing a testimony. Diversifying who's doing that, right? It's a great, great thing because, and y'all know this, I feel this. When somebody stands in the front of the room, there's immediately a different view of that person. And there's a sense among that person feels of, okay, this is significant. And there's a sense among the people that are seeing them that goes, that person is valuable in not just the everybody's valuable sense, but like they're adding value in a very significant way. Right? So when you ask a kid to read, man, you just told him, her, their parents, and the rest of the congregation, they matter. They matter. We want them here. Right? It's big. Any others? Yeah.
What we discussed here in Cedar has a similar thing that they call adopt a student.
And in Ashburn, we call them prayer partners, where, and it's just a call phrase, that, and where you can actually just give a younger person, a more experienced person, to bond with.
That's right. That's right.
So
And we'll fast forward here in just a little bit when we get into talking about that mechanism for connecting the generations personally. Bingo. You just hit it right on the head. It's a great idea. Great idea.
We talked about, somebody mentioned like yearly things. We have a yearly beach retreat that started off only as youth
Mm-hmm.
and their families that has grown, and now it's like a family beach retreat. We had a lady last year go and walk to the beach with a walker, along with a kid that was 3 or 4. So,
Wow. It's awesome.
We do it every year, and it's always maxed.
Yep.
And usually hold in our spray house.
It's great. Yeah, I was telling this group at lunch, my favorite mission trip I ever went on, this was probably, 7 or 8 years ago, when we took a group up to Canada, to Calgary, Alberta, Canada, to run a basketball camp. And we took every decade from teenager to 70s on that one trip. We had teenagers, 20-somethings, 30-something, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s on that one trip. Hands down my favorite trip I've ever been a part of. Because I was able to connect with people that are not in my normal spheres of everyday life. And we were able to bond on a whole different level. Trips and things like that bond us in unique ways. It's good. All right, let's shift over here and talk about some of the barriers. What are some of the barriers currently in your environment regarding like using these primary environments to connect the generations? What are some of the barriers that you've run into or that you see currently?
Diversity of music.
Okay. That was quick. Didn't take long to get there. It's good.
Repeat that.
Diversity of music. Yep. What else? What are some of the other barriers? Yeah.
It's kind of a tradition thing, but, at least in our church, a lot of the youth and younger folks go to children's church. And then that transition to, if you will, adult church is a little clunky.
Yep.
And so you get those perceptions of, hey, this is boring. So just that transition from children's church to adult service, that tradition or whatever, that transition can be clunky.
Yep. It's good. Anybody else ever seen that? I've seen it for years and years, and I've seen it from children's church into big church, or whatever we want to call it. I've seen it from student ministry and graduating, right? And you're an adult, and how are we connecting there? And there's a couple things I'll say about that, because it is a real barrier for a lot of churches. One of the things I would say is, and some of you in the room, you may walk regularly with a cane or a crutch of any kind, but what happens when you live or work or walk with a crutch for a really long time, and then one day you wake up and somebody took it? It's really hard to walk. And sometimes, I think unintentionally, we've got really good intentions in creating these separate spaces. I'm a big fan of student ministries and children's ministries and creating great environments for kids and students to be discipled in. But when we do that to such an extreme that we isolate them completely and they're no longer tethered to the larger church life at all, right? Where we don't give them any interaction or engagement with the rest of the church. Unfortunately, what can happen over years and years and years of that, you think about somebody doing that from birth to 18, when their specialized ministry is gone, their crutch is gone, engagement is much more challenging, right? They've got to have a new motivation that's got to basically be built from the ground up to engage. And so this becomes a barrier, whether it's children's church, which is a great thing. Again, I can get behind it in a big way. And many of you do it, I'm sure, really, really well. Sometimes student ministries do that. But it's when we completely isolate that it can become dangerous, but it can become a barrier really quickly. It's good. What else? Other barriers that you've run into or seen? Yes?
Lack of volunteers to organize events.
Yep. How many of you have felt that way? Yeah, probably all of us at different points. Yep. The 80-20 rule, right? 20% of the people do 80% of the work. All right. What happens when some of your 20% aren't there or can't help? What do you do? Right? Lack of leadership is a big deal. Really
I
big.
think in our meeting, we used to go to Quaker Lake Camp and do family camp every year.
That's awesome.
It might be in the winter or the late summer, but it takes a lot of organization, and these steps up to do that.
That's right. That's right. And I want you to dream with me for just a second about that problem. Think about this. If you've got that third component, where you've got a mechanism for connecting the generations on a personal level, so you've got older and younger that are working together, connecting on a personal level, the shoulder tap to come and help pull off an event, serve in a ministry, is a whole lot more convincing when there's a relationship. So relationships we want and we need, and there's a great benefit to them. There's also a great benefit to them because we have much more influence and access to people that we wouldn't have otherwise. And so that invitation to come and serve is actually amplified. The likelihood of it being responded with a positive is higher when there's a relationship that's the basis for even the invitation to come and help. All right, so that can certainly help. Yeah.
I think another barrier is resistance to change or trying to do that.
Yeah.
You kind of go along with it, turn over the leadership, and not being president.
Yeah.
Roger hit it right there. Apathy is a big barrier
Yeah.
that I think a lot of us pastors deal with because, you know, previous place I pastored out, a lady volunteered to be in hospitality. Well, 9 ladies critiqued what she did.
Yeah.
And she cried and she quit.
Yeah.
Here we had a young fellow snow plow in the parking lot. Nobody asked him. The older men critiqued it. It's not how they would do it. And so he says, why aren't they doing it?
Yeah.
So apathy is a barrier.
Yeah. You know, anytime, and I think apathy is a good word for it, there's probably another side to it too, right? You know, cynicism and like a critical nature, right? That's not necessarily just apathy there. There's really a question of health, right, that it raises in a sense. But here's what I would say. This kind of change and growth and development and investment requires sacrifice. I'll say it again. I've defined it a couple times for us. Sacrifice, right? Giving up something you love for something you love more. Giving up the way that the parking lot is plowed because I love that young man more than how the parking lot is plowed. Giving up, you know, the way I like to, you know, where I like to stand to welcome people is less important than me investing in this young woman who's coming on to our welcome team. Right? Giving up something I love for something I love more. And I don't know about y'all, but there's a lot of principles in the Bible, and there's a lot of things that we see demonstrated in the life of Jesus. Sacrifice may be the greatest. What's the Bible teach us about the purpose of Jesus coming? Sacrifice. And so what we're doing is not just trying to be nice, we're demonstrating the character of God. We're trying to become more and more like Jesus. And in doing so, it requires us to sacrifice as well. And this kind of generational investment and engagement will always require sacrifice. I've told people jokingly before, ministry would be so easy if it wasn't for the people. I mean, y'all, listen, I'm an introvert, okay? I would love to work from home. Punch a clock, move some numbers around. When I first got married, I needed a job to pay the bills, and that job was data management. Now, granted, over like 6 months later, I was like, oh my word, I can't do this for the rest of my life. But I look back at it some days now, and I'm like, it sounds pretty good. People, right? Ministry is people. Serving people. Serving people requires sacrifice. And some of the barriers that we run into, resistance to change, a lack of help, well, some of it requires sacrifice. And the reality is humanity is bent toward thinking about who first? Me. And sacrifice is hard for all of us. Yeah, I see a few hands popping up around here.
Sometimes it's, in a church especially, it's our own preconceived
Yeah.
An example is we had our sunrise service, and there's a certain place that you're supposed to stand in order to see the sun, although you really can't anymore because of a row of trees in the distance. But this year, we did it at a different place because of one of our members couldn't get up the hill good.
Yep.
So I think that was kind of a Christ-like gesture. But I had a couple people say something to me about it. Why weren't we up the hill?
Yep.
And I was kind of ready for them. I was going to say, well, what would Jesus do? You know? But it did, when I said, well, we're gathering because so-and-so can't really get up the hill, no more was said.
Yeah.
But I thought, really?
Yeah, that's right.
But our preconceived of, if you're going to do it right.
That's right.
Gets in our way.
Yeah. Hey, how many of you have ever thought that, or think on a regular basis that you're wrong about things? Right? I mean, if we're honest, we're like, okay, I know I'm wrong, but ain't nobody going out opening their mouth, raising their voice about them being wrong about things. But typically, we think we're right. Okay? That's natural. Yeah.
You know, a lot of this has to do with just what I was hearing. It has to do with the old thing that you like didn't change.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's not right unless you do it the old way. But I'd like to know, Pastor, how were you able to overcome that?
No, he said, if they can do it better than me, then they can do it till,
So did he quit church?
no, he still attends.
Yeah, he just doesn't.
No,
He just
what-
doesn't want to get involved in stuff that he may get really good with.
Yeah, I mean, got some about that age here. I mean, it's almost like, what's the point of me volunteering, Michael? They're just going to tell me I'm not doing it right. And it's apathy. It's not that they don't love this church, they do because they come, but it's like, I don't want to get critiqued over every little thing. And you try to explain to the Gen X and the millennials and the Gen Zs, as a pastor, the traditionalists, they grew up hard. And they grew up rigid. And they grew up in like with families with like 8, 9, 10 kids, where it's, by God, you do it this, because they had to survive as a family. There was no supermarkets. There was nothing. Younger generation didn't get that.
Yeah.
That the older generation was raised very rigid. But then the older generation doesn't understand everything that we've been talking about the last couple of times either. So,
Well, you know, I remember that for 10 years. People, they want somebody else to do the project. But then when somebody else does the project, they're really saying, I'm not criticized. What? And I say this, I mean, what's your priority for coming to church? Criticize people? Are we worshiping the Lord?
well, as a pastor, I will say this, that there are a lot of people who like being critics because they don't have to do anything, but they say a lot and it sounds like they know what they're doing. That's just the preacher and the flesh.
Well, and a couple other things. It's experience is what it is. Here's a couple things I would say about that. Sacrifice shouldn't be one way. Right? You know, I imagine in circumstances that some of you have been in, maybe similar to this, where you've thought to yourself, I just want to help. And so the critique is actually, and for some, not for all, but for some, comes from a good place. A desire to help this younger person, know maybe another way to do it, or some ideas, some thoughts. Well, I've done this for 20 years. Here's what I've learned from that. And so it's a two-way street. But the thing that will overcome it every single time is a relationship. Because if there's a relationship, there's an avenue for me to say to a younger person, hey, I really appreciate what you just did. You ever start your feedback that way? Hey, I really appreciate what you're trying to do here. I hope you do. I hope you start your feedback that way. If you can say it honestly, don't lie. All right? I really appreciate what you're trying to do here. The last time I did this, or for the last 20 years, I've been trying to plow the parking lot, and what I found is if I make four piles here, 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 and here, it actually creates more parking spaces. And so, tell me a little bit about why you did it the way you did it, and both have an opportunity to learn. If I engage, or if I even give feedback or criticism, criticism's a real thing. We need it. Anybody not need criticism or feedback? Yep, we all do, right? We need it. And so there's got to be a context in order to share it in a helpful way. And again, may have been ill-intentioned, may not have been, but if there was a relationship, a context to share some of that, then there's an opportunity for growth, right? That's the Psalm 145, working together, sharing with one another, the back and forth, right? Learning from one another that happens. And it's challenging, but I'm telling you, and this is why the mechanism piece, again, I don't have a silver bullet for how to do it, but if you can find a mechanism to build personal relationships between older and younger, so much of this can be overcome. So much of it can be overcome. Right? The feedback loop, there's a relationship for it. Right? The disagreements, there's a relationship. There's a context of a relationship for conversations. The different perspectives and point of views, the different priorities on how to organize your life and your schedule, there's a context, a relational context then to share those things in and work through them together. Right? It's a two-way street. Yeah?
Well, one thing, I know a lot of people in here knew Gene Swig, and I was a teenager when me and Gene, we would have some Sunday school arguments that were pretty epic. And Gene always was one thing that being an older person, talking to the teenager that I always appreciated, is at one point she would look at me and she would go, Mark, we're going to have to agree to disagree, and then move on from it. Yeah. And I think today a lot of times, I know y'all won't get this reference, but I call it the Eric Cartman syndrome, is we want to say, if you disagree with me, screw you guys, I'm going home.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And I think that's a problem that we have just in society.
We do. And I think, I call it take your ball and go home.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're at the park and you're trying to play a game, right? And people aren't agreeing with you. I mean, I've literally been in gyms where guys have been like, fine, if y'all are going to do this, and came and took the basketball and walked out and went and got in their car. Grown men. Literally, they did it. Went and got their basketball that everybody was using to play, took it and left. Right? And I think it's the same thing. If I don't get it my way, I'm out. Right? Now, I think the difference is the loyalist and the traditionalist. Right? You don't check out so quickly. Younger you are, the more likely you are to take your ball and go home quick. The older you are, the more likely you are to stick it out, but kind of gripe about it. Right? Again, we talked about it earlier. The older you are, the harder change is. It doesn't mean you're not selfish, though, when you're younger. You just express it differently. Take your ball and go home rather than complain about it. Right? I can find another one somewhere else. I can find another game. I can find another church. I can find another job. I'm going to take my ball and go home. Right? So there's a big difference there. But it is, like, it all boils down to, am I willing to give up something I love for something I love more? I am. So it raises the question, what do you love more? That becomes the big question. What do you love more? All right, briefly, any other barriers? Maybe one more if you've got any. Don't force it, but all right, we're going to move on because I want us to keep rolling. All right, now I want you to begin to think about potential. All right? So the three questions are this. How could you accomplish this in your meeting? Connecting the generations in your primary environments. How could you do that? What barriers might you face? So if you do something different, what are some of the barriers you might face? They may be the same. And then this is a really important question. Remember, I've told you, you do not want to throw out your convictions and your distinctives in order to do these things. So the question becomes, what boundaries do you need to establish so you do not dismiss your convictions? Right? Some would do an exercise like this and not ask this question because whatever it takes. I would argue, and I think the younger generations want somebody that's got convictions, right? these boundaries are really important, okay? So what do you need, what could you do to connect the generations in your primary environments? What barriers might you face, which again, I think we may see some of the very same things here, and that's okay. But then what boundaries do you need to establish as you do that? All right, 5 minutes. Go, right around your tables. All right, one more minute. One more minute. I find it pretty fascinating that what's happening is every one of these little group discussions that you're having, it's getting louder and louder each time, and it's taking longer and longer for you to stop. All right? So I'm encouraged by that, and I hope you see it too. Again, what's happening right now is that you are benefiting from one another. You're learning from one another, and what you're finding is that probably you're struggling with some similar things. You're finding that there's an opportunity to learn from the ideas of others, and so that's all part of the process, and it's a good thing. So when we start talking about what could be, right? This is a safe place to dream. All right? I'm a big fan of dreaming. I think it is good for us to imagine what could be. You know, the whole. How many of you have seen The Greatest Showman? I think it came out maybe 2019 or something like that. I know it came out right before COVID because when we were locked down at our house, we watched that movie, I think, for about 6 days straight, over and over and over and over, and memorized all of the songs to it. And but the whole idea is it's the Barnum and Bailey Circus, right? This is the story behind the creation of Barnum. And he is a dreamer. He is an absolute dreamer. He imagines a better future that nobody else could ever imagine. And that's where the whole idea of the circus came from. He was a dreamer, putting all of these crazy things and exotic animals in one place and letting people gather to be amazed by this show. He was a dreamer. Nobody fathomed something like that in his day, but yet he was a dreamer. And it's good for us to sometimes step outside of our comfort zone of what we know, what we already have seen done before. It's good for us to dream a little bit at times, and hopefully this exercise is going to help with that. So let me hear from you. What are some of the practices? What could you do? How could you potentially accomplish this connection of the generations in your meeting? What you got? Yes?
Well, the only addition we had, because we feel like we're doing a whole lot of that, is I don't think we've asked any of our younger people to be greeters.
Okay.
We think it's just its own focus.
Right. All right. So here's how I'm going to write that is to get young adults in visible positions, right? And that can be more widely applicable than just a greeting team or a welcome team. That might be on leading worship. It might be helping in different areas. It might be reading a scripture. I heard that mentioned and whatnot. But yeah, visible positions. I think that's a good thing. What else? And again, some of your ideas might live right here, right? Because some of the things that you heard are not things that you're currently doing.
A lot of times with us friends, like there's a few folks, it's a running joke that whoever is the head of the cemetery at a friend's meeting, you get that appointment for life. It's a running joke.
It's ironic, isn't it?
So like a lot of times, for younger friends, it's like, oh, if I take this job, I'm going to get this for the rest of my life. So if you give like, hey, try it for a year, or just do it for a year, and hopes that might.
Yep. Yeah. Put term limits, right? I mean, put some parameters around things. I don't know any 20-something that wants to sign up for something for the rest of their life other than retirement. Like, I don't know it. That's all I know. All right? Put some term. Hey, would you try this for 6 months? Test drive it. Right? This is a practice that I think is fantastic. Let people come in and try out ministries, ways to serve by test driving a little bit, like you would go to the dealership and try out a car. Right? Now you don't have to go to the dealership. Right? You can find your car online. They'll bring it to you, let you test drive it for a week, and you can send it back. Right? But test driving, we like to kind of try it out and feel it out, and then put some term limits around it. Hey, would you do this for 6 months? Can you help us for the next year with this, rather than saying, I'm going to do this for we want you to do this, and then you're roped in for the rest of your life. That's a great point. Great point. What else? Yes?
I think being consistent with our programs. So we have some programs in place, like our youth pastor does our young children during the 11 o'clock service. But if he's on vacation, we don't have anyone in place to replace him.
Yep.
So I think provided, so a parent says, well, why come? Because if I have to sit and babysit my kids, I don't get anything out of it.
That's right.
I might as well stay home and watch online.
Yep. No, it's a great point. I think being able to offer those things, these opportunities, regardless of if the only person that signed up to do it for the rest of their life is there or not, right? I mean, if they're going to have to do it for the rest of your life if nobody else ever gets brought along, which again goes back to, if I, as an older person, have a direct personal relationship, a discipleship, development, mentor relationship with a younger person, and I've been teaching children for the last 40 years, and my daughter asked me to come with her and her family on vacation next month, and I'm going to go, you know whose shoulder I'm going to tap to help fill in the spot? That person I got that personal relationship with. Hey, why don't you come with me for the next couple weeks and just learn how to do it? Right? That whole idea, I do, you watch. I do, you watch, we talk about it. I do, you help, we talk about it. You do, I help, we talk about it. You do, I watch. It's this handoff, right? Developing other people. It's a process of handing things off. And it helps alleviate those moments so that you can have consistency, because there's always somebody else. When there's the mechanism, I'm going to keep going back to it. When there's a mechanism for connecting the older and the younger on a personal level, so many of these things can be alleviated. You've got a context for dealing with conflict. You've got a context for developing the next generation of leaders. You've got a context for filling spaces. You've got a context for hearing about preferences and why. You've got a context for just about everything to be dealt with when there's a direct connection on a personal level between the older and the younger. All right. What else? Any other ideas here? Yep.
And recently we did an old-timey Quaker Day where the whole service was open worship. We celebrated our 100th anniversary here.
Yep.
And every young person was like, "Dear God, it's going to be quiet how long?" And then afterwards, it was like, that was pretty neat.
Yeah.
But I had to really get everybody geared up.
Yeah.
Like, hey, today you're the minister. Not me, not Sterling. You're pastoring each other.
Yeah.
We're going to do it like the Quakers did for 200 plus years before we had pastors.
Yep.
And they got into it.
Yep.
And now it's like, can we do it once a year?
Yep.
So we as friends have that mechanism. But do we pastors or do we clerks or elders, just kind of speaking to a lot of people in the room, do we push that? Do
Yeah.
we talk about that?
Yeah, if you've got distinctives in your hands kind of as a benefit for you, and I think that's one of them, absolutely. I've said it a couple times, I think, and I can't take credit for it. I don't remember where I first heard it, but I've heard it said by multiple people before. The ground is level at the foot of the cross, and you, as a people, as a group, as friends, actually practice that, even in your structure and your order. And what that allows you to do is actually show that you really believe that, which does actually open up more opportunity for more people to participate in a great way. And I'm glad you mentioned it, because I do think that that is a crucial component for you. And it begs the question for each of you, probably, do we really practice that? Is a distinctive, are we really practicing that? And that's for each of you, I think, on the local context, that level to think through. So it's a great example. Well, let's talk about some barriers. What are some of the, or boundaries rather, I'm sorry. What are some of the boundaries that you feel like you need to establish as you kind of dream about what could be?
That Jesus is the only way.
That's good. What else?
When I tell my youth when they're frustrated about the lack of change, I tell them they gotta participate.
Yeah.
They gotta put in some meat in the game, or some
Yep.
skin in the game.
Yep. And I think that's crucial, right? It's easy to be a sideline kind of, or a Monday morning quarterback. Like, that's easy, you know? That's what, this is why people like me sit and watch games on TV and yell at the television, right? It's just easier to do that. I'm not going to ask you if you're like me in that, but it's just easier to do that. It's easier to do that. man, if you want to bring about change, you got to engage. You got to participate, right? And we've got to remind people of that. And I think that's sort of a boundary and an expectation to say, hey, if we want to see things move forward and you want to preserve these things, these beliefs, these practices, these distinctives, these core convictions, if you want to preserve those things, let's get in the conversation, right? In a helpful way. Be a part of the conversation. Yeah. That's right. And you got to demonstrate it. You got to set an example. Yeah, Brent?
Stephen, I think one boundary, in order that we don't throw out what is unique about our distinction, is occasionally have a study on our beliefs and practices.
Yeah.
People come and people go, and over a period of time, you get unfamiliar with our faith and practices. Again, unfamiliar with our testimony.
Yep.
And even the history of the local church. I think there's a history there that people appreciate and then they'll migrate in that direction and try to maintain it.
Yeah.
But they need to know what it is.
That's right.
They know what they're part of.
That's
We've
good.
done a little bit of that, but in my opinion, it's been very little.
Yeah. There's got to be a why behind any change, right? There's also got to be a why behind any resistance to change. Some changes need to be resisted, right? Some changes need to be resisted, but we have to know why. Whether we want the change or we're resistant to a particular change, we've got to know why. And when we revisit the why and assess what we're doing based on what our framework is for decision making, your distinctives, right? When we have revisited the why, assessed the distinctives, we've assessed what we're trying to do next to those distinctives, it actually helps motivate people to engage, I think. And so it's a really important thing is you have to reassess on a regular basis. Assess what you're doing. And the easy thing to do is to do the thing and then just keep doing it. You know, just keep pressing the button. You know, rewind, repeat, rewind, repeat, rewind, repeat, rewind, repeat. And we keep doing it over and over. Next thing we look up and it's been 30 years of doing it the same way without a good reason why anymore. We've detached ourselves from the why. We just do it out of rote memory or tradition, right? So we've got to constantly be reassessing. And I would encourage you, on the grand scale, like of thinking about the distinctives and stuff like that, right? That's a bigger question. But on your practices in your local context, I would encourage you every year to do an assessment of everything you do. Every year, do a reassessment of everything you do and be able to answer the question why and connect it to something significant about who you are and what you believe. If you can't answer why and it's not connected to who you are and what you believe, then it should raise a question of should we do this? It doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything that's not connected to those things. You're going to have a supper, have everybody come and do, you know, dinner on the grounds or whatever, you know, you're going to do something like, great, do it. Have some fun, enjoy those things. It doesn't mean you can't do something that seems a little bit less important, but assess everything every year. I've seen a couple of hands. Yes.
As I was thinking about this, to me, a barrier and a boundary is the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on which side you're on.
Fair.
And the folks that are on the other side look at it as a barrier. I can't come there because y'all do this, and I don't understand, and I don't like the music, yada, yada.
Yep.
And we're on the inside,
Yeah.
if you will. And that's the boundary. I
Yeah.
want to go to this point.
Yeah.
So we've got to go to that wall and bring them over to realize why that boundary is there.
That's
and
right.
For them to realize that it really isn't a barrier to them.
Yeah.
Because this is something that you want to be on this side.
That's right. Yeah. And here's what I would say to that, and I think it's a good distinction, right? These would be things that I would ask the question of, what is it that's unnecessarily in the way of change? These are necessarily in the way of change. Does that make sense? So these need to stay. These don't necessarily need to stay. And so it's a good, because it's a matter of perspective, because when you start talking about Jesus being the only way, that's going to be a barrier to some people, right? But I'm thinking internally, right, for those of us that share those same convictions and those same distinctives, the question is what unnecessarily is keeping us from change versus what is necessary to make sure that we don't go outside of those guardrails that we've established. It's a good point. It is a matter of perspective when it comes to some of these boundaries, I think. Yeah. And for some people that maybe have a little bit less like healthy view of things, some of these unnecessary things, in their mind, they're necessary. That's right. I saw another hand. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that the more we know about our history, and the more that other people know about our history, they want to be part of the Quaker movement. And when I've been reading a lot of books lately, and it's strange, it comes up Quakers in about every book because they were so involved in the community, and the women were some of the first who began. I just feel like, because some people think we're called, we're not.
Right.
And I just feel like our history, and I think we need to talk about that more.
It's good.
Because of the Red Railroad and all that.
That's right.
It is just tremendous.
Yeah.
So,
It's fantastic.
and I think that everybody else.
Let those things, right, become more known.
I was going to say something really similar about the history, but the other thing is sometimes when Quakers are talked about, I don't know if you watched John Oliver on HBO last week, he did a whole thing, and my friends all sent it to me because it was about Quakers and solitary confinement in prisons and all this stuff. And we were actually the ones that came up with the idea of solitary confinement, and now it's got a negative connotation. And I was like, but if you read, he didn't go into enough detail about where it was that we were taking it and what we did. And I think that the history part is really important for the younger generation that might just see John Oliver talk about Quakers.
That's right.
And just think, well, that's a terrible thing.
That's right.
But if they knew more about it. So I do think that the history part of teaching, it is important.
I remember there was a quote up on the wall in one of my high school history teachers' classes. And y'all have probably all heard this before, right? Those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it, right? I think it's also true that those that forget their own past, their history gets, or it gets changed, right? Being a revisionist is a real thing now, and so the narrative of a historical kind of line or account can be shifted really, really easily. And so I think to both of your points, you've got to protect the narrative of your history. And you do that in part by teaching more people it, right? I mean, how has the gospel been passed on from generation to generation to generation? Just talking about it, sharing it with one another, telling the next person. Well, the same is true of your rich history that I believe is incredible. The more I've learned about it, it's a great thing, and I think it needs to be guarded and protected. And so you've got to be the ones that own the narrative and tell the story because you're the closest to it. Otherwise, it's going to be revised. Somebody's going to revise it, and it's going to be told very differently. And so I would encourage you to find a way, the avenue, right, to share that history, which I believe is really, really, really rich. I'm going to do two more real quick, and then we're going to jump on to the next. Yeah.
We were talking, I guess this could be a barrier, but I guess churches individually have to decide if it's a boundary, is what we think, like dress codes and stuff. Like, we had some visitors come sing, and the first night that they did, they had on like ball caps and stuff. There's nothing biblical that says that they can't wear a ball cap.
Yeah.
At least I've not heard it or read it in the Bible where it says, thou shalt not wear a ball cap in church. But even me thinking it's okay, I was sitting there even thinking at first, well, they should know better. and then I had to get over myself.
Yep.
Because their music was great.
Sure.
And it was all about Jesus.
Yep.
And their ministry was all about Jesus.
Yeah.
But I think we have to decide in our churches individually what. My son wears shorts like 24/7, and he has his home shorts and he has his Sunday shorts. He wore on to some cargo shorts to a different church with a polo shirt and was told that was like being drunk and then preaching.
Yeah.
So we have to decide.
That's right. I think it's a good way to say it. You've got to make a decision about what is unnecessarily a barrier and what necessarily needs to be your guardrails and draw some lines. And it's a real thing. I mean, it's a real thing. I felt this myself. I'll tell you real quick. We hosted like an Easter egg hunt kind of event a few weeks ago, and my head, I don't know if y'all noticed, but I'm bald, right? And the sun was out, and you didn't notice, Mike. I appreciate that. I got burnt bad. And so like an hour and a half in, I realized my head was roasted. And so I had a ball cap in my car, and I went and got it. Well, we did this thing on a Sunday afternoon, and then I was leading a class on Sunday night, and I kept my hat on because I was afraid if I took it off, my whole scalp was going to peel off with it. And I actually felt kind of uncomfortable because I was like, I feel like I need to explain myself as to why I'm wearing a hat right now. And so I think that those pressures, and I'm one that, I'm not super formal. I'm just not. And the way you see me dress right now is the way you'll see me dress every day of the week, unless maybe sometimes when I go to the ball field or if I'm sitting around watching TV. This is what I wear all day pretty much otherwise. But I still struggled with that a little bit personally. And so I think it is something that people are sensitive to. You've got to make a decision. Is that an unnecessary barrier or is it a necessary boundary? And that's going to be a personal, local context decision. All right, I saw your hand. Yep.
I think something interesting happened in our meeting COVID with that particular instance. Dress code got scaled down because it was more important for people to just be part of the process.
Yep.
And people have been reticent to kind of go back
Yep.
to formality. I've even had a couple of gentlemen say, I'm glad we can wear polo shirts now.
Yep.
And so on some levels, that never changed what we believe.
That's right.
It changed how we practiced on a regular basis, maybe how we came, but it didn't change what was in our heart.
That's right.
I think that's one of the things that really the
That's
questions
good.
you're asking is getting at is what are our real priorities, what do we really want people to see. when
That's
we're
right.
done,
That's good.
and how are we really being intentional about bringing people together. And I think that there was one good thing out of that process for us. It was that, and it was creating another way for people to be involved. We bought a transmitter to transmit our service to the parking lot.
Wow.
Meeting outside.
Yep.
We kept that. We had folks who had health issues who continue to use that as a way to not come inside because they're concerned.
That's good.
So, and we used it yesterday for a funeral service. It was
Wow.
overflowing.
Yep.
So in some ways, it pushed us to do some different things.
Yep.
That didn't have anything to do with what we believed. It
That's
had
right.
to do with making sure worship could happen.
That's good.
And I think worship happening became more of a priority than
Bingo.
how we were doing it.
That's good. That's really, really well said. Really, really well said. I think it's a good summary for us here. So I'm gonna press pause on us here, and we're gonna move into that second component, so we can keep on moving along. So the second component, if you remember, is giving meaningful opportunities for meaningful participation. Right. So thinking about your current practice. This is current right now. Okay. Current practice. What's a significant role of influence in your organization? So in your meeting, what is a significant role of influence? So you're identifying those roles and responsibilities that would be deemed significant, okay? Who is doing those things currently? And when I say who, I'm not thinking names. I'm asking a question about age, okay? What age people are doing that? And then what are some of the barriers maybe that currently you see to including younger leaders? All right? All right, 5 minutes. Yeah, well, they don't have a sticky thing on the back of them. So if we had some like painter's tape or something, we could do it.
Yeah.
minute. We'll go about one more minute. About one more minute. I might have to take back what I said last time because I think everybody's getting to that mid-afternoon tired point. It was a little bit quieter that round. So either you got all of it out in the first round or everybody's getting tired. So I'm sure there's fruit's sweet. It's got sugar in it. It's natural. Go grab some, right? Kind of perk back up for the last 30, 45 minutes or so. All right, so let's talk about this. And what I want to do is we're gonna not answer every question completely just for the sake of time. And what we probably won't spend the majority of our time on right now is talking about some of these boundaries and barriers, because we're going to talk about the barriers initially, but the boundaries especially are really going to be determined on a local context in some ways, okay? I recognize that on a state level that there are some boundaries that you're going to have as well. Okay, and that's applicable to everybody in the room, maybe even larger than just on the state level as well with some of the distinctives. But, the barriers I think are important for us to think about. Some of those things are going to be very localized. They're going to be very specific to context. And so we won't spend quite as much time on those. But I do want to touch on current practice right now. What is a role of significant influence or leadership in your meetings right now? What would you say?
Clerk.
What's that, clerk? Okay. And in your environment, I'll let different people answer this. How old are the people that are in those kind of roles? 60s? All right, we'll go with boomers. That seems like close to consensus. It's probably not true of everybody, but seems like there was a lot of that same response at one time. All right? All right, what else? Other roles of significant influence?
I would say nominating committee.
Okay. Just nominating committee or committees in general?
No, when nominating committees select the other
Yep.
committees.
Okay. All right. I'm going to start shorthanding stuff to speed things up. Who does that now? I'm seeing a trend. All right. What else? Other significant roles? Hold on. Let's say what? Ed, Christian Ed. All right, who's doing it?
Boomers and traditionalists.
I'll put boomers plus. All right, good. What else? Yep. I'm going to call them influencers because that's what we call modern people that carry a lot of clout, right? Nowadays, that takes right? You've got TikTok influencers, and you've got YouTube influencers, you've got Instagram influencers. It's like a thing, like you want to be an influencer. In our churches, we have influencers. We have those people that carry a lot of weight, a lot of clout, right? Who are those people? How old are those people in your churches?
The Quakers call those weighty friends.
Weighty friends. I like it. I'm going to use that in other contexts because that's really good. What? Hold on, let's real quick. The age of these, most of your influencers, your weighty friends. Okay. boomers plus, all right, what did you say?
I was gonna say pastoral staff.
Okay. So pastors, what we got? How old are they? Yep. Yep. Okay. So the majority then are boomer and up? Is that fair? And younger? Okay. So I'm going to put, there's a lot, I'm not going to put anything there because there's some diversity there, which I'd say I applaud you. That's great. That's a good thing to see some diversity in that particular thing, because I will tell you, there's a strong likelihood that your organization, your church, your meeting, your network isn't going to grow more diverse than your leadership, right? It's typically not going to grow more diverse than your leadership, all right? And so that's encouraging to hear that there's some diversity there a little bit. All right, what else? Any other roles? Elders. What do we got? What's that? Okay, great. Mostly for you. You've got some diversity in there. Diverse. Okay, great. That's great.
Anyone who'll say yes. I saw my 29-year-old clerk just
The honesty, it just keeps growing. I love it. I love it. All right, are there any others? Teachers. Okay. How old are they? Diverse? Right? So what we got here is we've got a way to begin to zone in on some specific places where we need a little bit more work. Right? I just heard 29-year-old clerk back here, but we said most of the clerks are boomers. There's a space for us to kind of zone in on and think about. And again, change for the sake of change is not a solution. Change for the sake of change is not a solution. The process of change for roles that are significant in your churches is not overnight. Because here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to go, okay, well, we want to be like them and have a 29-year-old clerk. So whenever the next time to nominate and make that change happens, whenever that is, you just go, all right, we're going with a 30-year-old. Without developing that 30-year-old, without growing them, without discipling them, without training them, you're in for a disaster probably, right? So change for the sake of change is not a solution. There's got to be a process to the change. There's got to be an end in mind. And the end is not just the change, right? The end is the engagement, right? And we'll talk about it in just a minute, sustainability is a goal here, right? We don't want to just put a Band-Aid on today. We want a sustainable plan in future, right? And that's what we're thinking about. So I would zone in on some of those things in particular. Briefly, what are some barriers to making changes to who's in those roles?
I would say tend to ask help with those you have most in common with.
Okay.
And that comes very generational.
Yeah. So you're saying there's a lack of relationships currently between the generations, that's kind of a barrier? Okay.
Also, most boomers are retired, so they have more free time to be willing to take on a job versus.
We have young people who not only are at the beginning of their careers, but a lot of them have young children.
Mm-hmm.
They just feel like they don't have time for one more thing.
Yep. So there's flip side, two sides of that coin, right? Your boomers have more time, your younger adults have less time, right? Or at least they say they do. Some of them have it, they just don't want to use it.
And then the card or the escape route that millennials use is, I haven't been trained.
Yeah, I haven't been trained. That's exactly right.
Don't feel qualified, yeah.
So let's think about our mechanism for a second. If we have a mechanism to connect the older and the younger on a personal level, we've got a context for training too. Right? We've got a context for training. We've got built-in intentional time that's already been carved out and created to spend time together. We've got a relationship, right? We're benefiting from, the experience here and the opportunity here, right? That mechanism, we keep coming back to it for a reason. There's a reason why so much of what I was researching kept coming back to this crucial idea of creating a mechanism to connect the older and the younger on a personal level. When we can do that, it really changes the game on a lot of different things. Any other barriers?
What about our culture of expectation?
Yeah.
Or other role models, state positions,
This is, again, change doesn't happen overnight, right? And so expectations do have to change, because here's the deal. In many instances, some of these things are true for good reason, because some of these boomers have incredible life experiences. Some of them are far more mature, right? And so in some instances, there's a good reason for this. And so unless we create some clear expectations about what we're trying to do, right? And again, we'll talk about it in a minute. Sustainability is a goal here, not just doing good for today, but setting our meetings up, our churches up, your network up to be sustainable for the long run. You want it to be another 300 years. That's what you want. You don't want it just the rest of your life. You want it to be another 300 years. Right? And so we've got to think about managing the expectations and developing some clear expectations for our people. All right. I just realized I left out a letter here, and if anybody else noticed that already, thank you for being so kind and gracious not to say it. All right. We're going to jump into kind of the potential, and I want to clarify what I'm asking you to do here, because we're going to narrow this a little bit for the sake of time. I want you to answer this first question. What opportunities could young adults be a part of? Don't worry about this question. It's a yes or no question. It's really just to get you thinking. Don't worry about the barriers. And I take that back. Don't worry about the boundaries. Let's talk about the barriers briefly. So question 1 and question 3 is what I want you to spend a few minutes on. What opportunities could you hand off to younger adults? And then what barriers might you face if you do that? If you make those changes, if you were to make those changes, what barriers might you face? And again, your boundaries are probably, a lot of those are going to come back to these things that you've already set in place as well, in your distinctions and your convictions. All right? All right, so questions 1 and 3 are what I want you to take a few minutes and try to answer. All right? We'll take 3 or 4 minutes. All right, I imagine that there's going to be a lot of crossover from the roles that you have to the new roles. So just 1 more minute. And and then we'll talk about these together. All right. I know it was a short window, but I really I want to make sure. So at the end of today, I'm not going to put a date on the screen of when we're meeting in 4 weeks, all right? So there's a couple things I really want us to bring some resolution on. So shortening that time up a little bit, but I think we're going to see some crossover from this column right here to these down here. So what are some of the potential roles that you see that we don't already have up here, okay? Any that we don't currently have listed here already, so clerk, nominating committee, those, all of those. What are some additional roles and opportunities that you see younger adults could step into that would give them an opportunity for influence?
One that's not up there that's really important is the treasurer of the church.
Good.
I've been the treasurer for 11 years. I've learned to beg off. I came up with a person who volunteered. The first thing I asked her was, you do balance your checkbook. I've never balanced it in my life. And she's 60 years old.
Wow.
So that's,
I thought you were going to tell me it was a 30-year-old.
you know, you've got some skills versus.
Yep. You've got a profile, right? We'll talk about this when we're talking about developing people in just a minute. You need to develop a profile of what those type of people are. What are the qualities that they have, right? And you've got to find and identify those. Ushers. Good. What else?
Quaker men.
What's that?
Quaker men.
Quaker men?
Stephen, you mentioned last time that websites and social media is
New front door.
Front door.
Yep.
And so, let's be honest, that's right up their alley.
That's right. Web design. It's good. Others?
Worship leader.
Worship leader. Great.
Children's leaders.
Children's leaders.
We're going with children's leaders, so I would go with teacher aides.
Someone that's filling for you on vacation?
Hi, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say evangelists, like our church isn't growing because we don't evangelize.
Those things are connected, aren't they? If we don't share it, it's hard to grow.
Well, what I tried to implement recently was a witnessing program.
Yep.
Because here's the deal. People go to church with their friends.
Yep.
So my grand plan was to try to get our young people to bring their friends here.
Right.
Which, thankfully, Hannah and some others have been trying to do.
Yep.
But doing the witnessing program where they are the evangelists. So I
That's
like
right.
that idea.
That's good. I'll tell y'all just a quick story. A young man by the name of Tyler moved into our community in January. Odd series of events, but we ended up getting connected through somebody that said, hey, there's this guy, you should get to know him. And I was like, okay, I'll cold call, why not? Right? So I called Tyler one day and I'm like, hey, so-and-so gave me your name, said you're living nearby where our church is. I'd love to connect with you at some point and just kind of get to know you. And it was a little weird, right? But I didn't tell him, hey, come on Sunday morning and I'll introduce you to some people. Hey, come, I said, you want to meet for coffee? And so we met for coffee, and for 2 months, Tyler and I met for coffee every week. On Thursday afternoons, we met for coffee, and he was in a really desperate place in life. Well, 2 weeks ago, he trusted the Lord. And you know what? during that process, he started coming with me on Sunday mornings. He sits with my family each week now. Right? 27 years old, doesn't know anybody in North Carolina, except maybe he's got 2 other friends that he knows that live in Charlotte. He's living in Winston-Salem. Doesn't know anybody. But that started with a cold call, which was a little uncomfortable, that formed into a relationship that put us in a third space that was safe for him, right? That then led to an invite that ultimately ended up changing his life. And so I would highly encourage that. I mean, mobilize your people to engage where they're at, build those relationships like what we're talking about doing in here through the church. Encourage them and train them to build relationships outside the church too, in the community, and use it as an opportunity to change people's lives, right? Share with them. It's good. Any other roles or opportunities?
Sound system?
Yep. Right. Any others? All right, you see any barriers to these things? I mean, I'm looking at this list right here and going, and I have a hard time imagining what the barriers are to, getting somebody to help with sound, getting somebody to, help with web design.
But that's my job.
There's your barrier. I just want you to know I really appreciate you, because on multiple times today you have said what I think several people in the room are feeling and thinking, and you've said it out loud, and I really appreciate it. I want you to know that. Yeah.
Same thing we talked about earlier at lunch was criticism.
That's right. Yep. Yep. Criticism. I mean, the same thing we talked about earlier, just this kind of nature of criticism. And I put down here preference as well, because there is some preference involved in some of these things. Yeah.
I would say for the younger folks, it will be anxiety.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, for those of you that are slightly older than the average millennial in the room, I want you to catch something that just happened. So Sterling mentioned anxiety, which we've already talked about as just a growing epidemic. And then somebody else in the room, and I think it came from this side of the room, but I don't know exactly who it was, said, "Oh yes," in an affirmation of that. I know sometimes it feels like there's a desire just to not be a part, like I just want to be here, but I don't want to have to do anything. Sometimes that is actually not laziness, it's anxiety, because of the critique that might come, or because of what they've seen for so long. Things are done a specific way. You've got to dress a specific way when you're doing those things. You've got to talk a specific way when you're doing those things. That can be pretty anxiety-inducing, and so that's a real thing. Yes?
Anxiety is not just for the young people, too.
Bingo.
Because if I would not be any good at all on that sound board.
That's right.
it is-
That's right. That's right. Right? It's a great point. Tell me your name. Phyllis. Phyllis just made a fantastic point. Anxiety isn't one way, right? It feels the same way. It's overwhelming to those that are older that don't have the context of web design. Design the web. I don't know how to. I can't do that. That's overwhelming for me to think about. Right? It's a real thing. Yes.
I think there's two things. When people are asked, oftentimes they're just said, "Hey, will you serve on this committee?" There's no. We really have been thinking about it, and we think you are a good fit and have a talent and a skill, and making someone feel wanted, not just that they're filling a hole.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing I'll say on that too is that, as an example, I got asked to serve on a committee for us, and I was like, I do not know how to do that job.
Yep,
Y'all are
that's right.
desperate.
Yep.
Clearly, if you're asking me.
Yep.
And they were kind enough that someone volunteered to do the job and let me be underneath them and learn how to do the job.
Perfect. That's a beautiful picture.
And then the next year I'm supposed to do the job. But well, not that next year, but no.
But right now you're a little anxious about it still, aren't you?
But it's still that they gave me the opportunity to learn the job.
Yep.
And not just throw me in the deep end and say, all right, snap.
Yep.
Or, listen, you're the last
Yeah, that's right.
Like saying that, we think, it is sales.
Yeah. Well, and think about how you talk to your kid. Like, you want your kids to feel wanted, not used, right? Now, functionally, there's some things you need them to do, right? But the way you talk about those things with them will either give them life or just suck the life right out of them.
The other thing is, when somebody asks me to do something, the first thing I say is, what's the job description?
Yep.
How often do I have to meet? What time am I committed to?
Yeah.
And a lot of us in here have standing committees.
Yep.
And there are people on there that they don't even stand, they just sit, they don't do anything. So maybe we need to revamp these committees and get the dead wood axe.
Well, here's what I would say. I affirmed you for being honest, and now it's all coming out, right? I did. This one's on me, Mike. I'm pointing back down here. I know most of you can't see it. Revisit, reassess. Every year, reassess these things. And I know that these are bylaws and constitutions that inform some of these things sometimes, right? But you've got to really consider reassessing things on a regular basis. And part of that is, if there is a clear job description, listen, in our church, I've asked our teams for job descriptions for every volunteer role, not just for paid positions, but for every volunteer role. It allows us to say, this is the bar, this is the expectation, and then we've got a means of accountability to come back to those things. And so what it allows you to do is, hey, this is what's expected of you. It's, hey, I totally understand. It doesn't have to be like a critical confrontation. Hey, this past year, I know it's been difficult for you to do this well. And so I'd love to give you the freedom to step out of this, but I want you to know that this year the bar is still right here. And so we'll start a conversation. We're trying to find some others. If it's not going to work for you, we totally understand, right? And to use that, right? Have some accountability around it. But that assessment, I think, is really, really important. All right, here's what we're going to do. Jump into the last category real quickly. Currently, do you have any mechanisms to connect the generations personally? We're just going to go with that question, okay? Go ahead and hit the barriers too. We're going to do both of those, all right? You got 3 minutes. It's a quick one, I know. 3 minutes. About 1 more minute. All right. So, I'm anxious to hear what you currently have in place when it comes to the mechanisms. Right now, again, we're talking about what currently is in practice for you. So, what are some current practices, some mechanisms that you have in place to connect older and younger on a personal level, right? 1-to-1. What do you have?
Prayer partners.
What's that? Prayer partners. Good. Okay.
I know COVID slowed us down on it, but our Quaker Ben used to take our youth group fishing.
Okay. So I'm just going to put trips in general then. Okay.
Sports, basketball, softball, all those things, intergenerational activities. And by the way, have emotions while they do.
You got to throw that in there, right?
I like Sydney, but she makes a lot of our stuff intergenerational, like our Easter egg hunt, VBS.
Uh-huh.
All generations are
Yep.
involved.
Yep. So I'll put again, I'm going to put serving. Right? Because again, what we're talking about here is means of getting people one-on-one together, connected in a relationship. And so what we've got here, the prayer partners, is a natural, it's obvious. Right? These people are praying for one another and for maybe needs in the larger church. You've got trips that can become a means to, an avenue to a relationship being formed. A fishing trip or a mission trip. Sports can be an avenue to, in and of themselves, if you're in a gym playing basketball with a bunch of other folks, you're probably not formulating a personal relationship, a one-on-one, but it's an avenue to finding common interest for potential relationship. And then serving. I'll tell you, one of the lowest hanging fruit things that you have in your church is if you've got in your children's ministry, you've got older folks and younger folks serving side by side, there is a natural opportunity for there to be an avenue to relationship with one another, right? Yes?
Yeah, some of us after worship on Sunday move up to lunch.
Awesome. Yep. 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 But it's an avenue. That's right. It's an avenue to potentially develop relationships, right? Because what I want you to see is that there may be a real big challenge in front of you at actually connecting older to younger personally. But you have avenues that are already in place. You've got environments that already put some of these people in the same place. Again, this is why it's a three-legged stool. If you've got your primary environments where multiple generations are all connecting together in different ways, you've got an avenue, an environment that relationships can be formed out of, right? If you've got, trips where people go together, older and younger, there's an avenue for things like that to already happen. If you've got meals that are taking place where older and younger are in the same room, at the same restaurant, at the same place, at the same table, there's a potential there. And so this isn't necessarily doing the discipleship, but it's an avenue to getting people connected to one another. Right? Yes?
You mentioned those transition times and the crutch thing earlier about children's ministry going to church or
Yep.
our youth group finishing out going to college. We have a Secret Saint program that we do for our college students, and all somebody comes alongside and sends them gifts and encourages them throughout that year, and at the end of the year, tomorrow we're going to have our breakfast and reveal who those saints were that cared for them.
That's awesome.
Send them cards, and so in essence, they'll meet them, but you got really three generations. In some ways, you got the youth that are college students, you got the parents,
Yep.
and you got some that are older that are grandparents' age that are all maybe serving the saints, so you kind of connect three generations.
That's awesome. I hope all of y'all wrote that down. That's a beautiful thing. That's a really, really good idea.
We haven't done this in a while, but at one point, our youth leader would bring the children to get an adult or a couple to host the youth group in their home.
Uh-huh.
An older adult couple host, will sort of have intergenerational youth group in their own home.
Yep. Small groups, Bible studies with students, meeting in a home, stuff like
Well,
that.
they usually just come for games, usually.
It's awesome.
Board games, whatever.
Yep, just
play.
enjoy being together. It's great. Avenues. Again, be reminded there are so many ways to do this. It's just taking them and turning these things into personal relationships. Using these as an avenue to connect an older individual with a younger individual, which may mean I don't know about y'all, when I find out somebody has a motive that I didn't know about until late in the game, I don't really love it. Right? Be straight with me up front. Tell me what you're really planning to do, what you want me to do. Don't bait and switch, right? Get me to the event, and then all of a sudden it's like, all right, here's your new mentor. No. Say up front, hey, we're going to do this fishing trip. And at the end of it, what we're really trying to do, and we're telling these teenage boys, we're telling their parents, and we're telling the older men that are going as well, we're saying, hey, the end goal of this is we actually want to have some fun. We want to enjoy being together, fellowship with one another, and we're really hoping that some personal relationships are going to develop so that we can develop some mentor friendships coming out of this. Tell them up front. Be up front with it. So don't bait and switch, right? Be up front about it. Tell them what you're doing, right? And then go and try to do it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put another set of questions. Again, I think some of our barriers are going to be similar, right? Lack of relationship, willingness, apathy, anxiety, some of those things that we've talked about already. These questions I want you to take a picture of. I'm going to get out of the way. And the reason I want you to take a picture of them is because I want you to work through these questions with people in your local context, in your meeting. And I want you to begin dreaming and thinking together about how to do this. What does it look like to do this in our context? And have a conversation. Right? Have somebody over for dinner and have a conversation around these questions. Have somebody of a different generation than you. Right? Get coffee with them and have a conversation about these particular things. But I want to encourage you to use these questions to talk with others about how to do this in your context. The experts on your context are the people in your context. Right? Trust them. Ideas are going to be generated. And just like we've done here today and several weeks ago as well, when we begin to talk about these things together, what it does is it generates new ideas. You're hearing things from others that you've not thought of necessarily before. So I want to encourage you, write those down, take a picture of them, and use those. And really the two big questions you're asking are this: what are you currently doing? Okay? And what could you be doing? And in all of those, hold firm on the boundaries, the necessary boundaries, and identify honestly the unnecessary barriers that we've got. All right, I'm going to jump ahead real quick, and here's what I want to do real quick. I want to give you a model for development and discipleship in 2 minutes. All right? This is the fastest I've ever done this, but I'm going to do it. All right? First of all, I'm not saying anything you've never heard. Discipleship and development are a biblical idea. This is 2 Timothy 2. Pass on to others that would be able to teach others, right? It's just the idea of multiplying. Verse 2 is kind of the crux here. What you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, and trust the faithful men who will be able to teach others also. This is Paul writing to Timothy. Titus 2, same picture, but it talks about older men with younger men, older women with younger women. This is a biblical concept to pass on these things to a younger generation. Luke 10, Jesus set the very same example, right? After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them on ahead of him, 2 by 2, in every town and place where he himself was about to go. And he said to them, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. Multiplication has always been in God's plan. Growing and developing others has always been in God's plan. There's a couple of benefits to it. One, I've already mentioned, recruitment. It helps you today. It helps you get people where you need people today. But, and as I've said it several times today, it also brings about what I would call sustainability, which means you want your churches to be thriving in 300 more years. We don't want to patchwork deal with the problem. We don't want to band-aid the problem. We don't want to force people into places just to get spots filled. We want to provide an experience that is developmental, right? It's a biblical practice to develop and disciple others so that it continues to multiply. Because if all we do is train people to fill spots, at some point that's going to run out of steam. And that's what I think we're feeling in a lot of churches these days. It's run out of steam, just filling spots. We've got to disciple and develop others so that there's a long-term sustainability to it. So how do we do that? 3 keys, and I'll put them all up here. Identify potential leaders. Develop a profile of a leader. Develop the profile of a leader. What's a leader look like? What does the clerk look like? Not physical appearance, to be clear. That's not what I'm talking about. All right. What kind of characteristics do they show? What does a clerk look like and do? So develop a profile of what a leader is. And be on the lookout for them. Always be looking, right? Always be looking for these people. This isn't like I'm going to try it for a minute. Always be looking for these folks and have conversations. Ask people about that type of person. Hey, I'm trying to find the type of person that's like this. Have conversations with younger adults. Hey, these are the kind of people we think we need. What do you think about that? Is that achievable? Is that attainable? Do you think we can find those folks? Are we missing something? Are there characteristics that we haven't identified? Have conversations with people. And at times, I'm not a huge fan of this, but cast the wide net. Stand up in front of everybody and say, we need help. We need leaders. But here's what I would say. Do it with a story. Stories are far more motivating than information or just a beg or ask of people. Give people a story of change and life change and transformation as you cast that wide net to recruit people to step into different leadership roles. So identify them, develop them, have a plan for how you're going to develop them based on how you want to see them grow, how you want to see them grow in different ways. And this requires time, it requires patience. I just realized I've got some of these things. I'm going to put them up real quick. So be on the lookout, have conversations, cast the wide net when necessary. There. And then remember what your goal is. Recognize that it requires time, it requires a plan, and it requires patience. And then deploy. This is a really hard thing for a lot of people. Deploy them inside your church, pretty easy. Deploy them inside another church, a little bit harder to do. Deploy them outside the church to be faithful in their neighborhoods, in their schools, in their workplaces, a little bit more comfortable. Deploy them to far, far away places. And I'll tell you, churches that are growing in America are emphasizing sending. Sending people on mission, sending people to help plant churches in Baltimore, sending people to different opportunities. It's interesting, isn't it? That they're growing even though they're sending. But that's what's happening. We've got to deploy them to far, far away. So here's what I want to do as we close. Just a little bit of encouragement for you. Keep learning, y'all. I'm so encouraged by the fact that you want to ask these questions and you want answers to these questions. Keep learning. Keep trying. Don't stop. If what you hold on to, what you have, in your tradition, in your message, is so important, which it is, I would agree. Keep trying to give it away. Keep trying to give it away. And ultimately, we need to trust the Lord, right? So keep praying. Sometimes it gets hard. And you've been praying for years. Keep praying. I really do think it's worth it. So thank y'all for letting me be a part of this over the last month or so. It's been an encouragement to me. I will tell you that I've taken away some things from these conversations that have personally benefited my own journey, my own faith. I've learned from you, and that's been a tremendous blessing to me. I'm incredibly encouraged by the heart that is represented by those that have been a part of this, and the heart that I know is behind many of you and your network and the whole state, all of North Carolina friends. What I'm hearing is there is a deep love for the Lord and a deep desire to reach another generation. And you put those two things together, and some good things can happen when we start to get strategy alongside of it. So I hope, I really do, I hope that the Lord moves in incredible ways in the churches. I'll be praying to that end. But I'm thankful for what I've gained from this too, what I've learned from you all. It's been a blessing to me, so thank you all so much.
A few thank yous. Thank you, Stephen, and thanks for sharing with us. Thanks to Cedar Square for being our host meeting and all that you've done. Thanks to the program committee for providing and getting the lunch. And anybody else that's done anything today, your participation today, thank you for that. You know, last annual sessions, we were charged, Executive Ministry Council was charged to have these leadership workshops. You know, and Darrell Bodie came in last fall and shared with you an individual type perspective, and Stephen has shared with you several different things. And there's one thing that I asked you to do before we begin this morning, and do you remember what I asked you to do? Plant the seeds. If this group doesn't do it, it's not going to get done. You've got to be the ones. You've got to take it back, and you've got to plant it. And you can get people there that will help you. There's people in your meetings that will help you do this, but you've got to be the one that instigates it. And I'm going to be praying for you that happens, because myself and David and Roger would like some relief this fall. We were supposed to went off last year. Friends, when the nominating committee calls your church, specifically individuals on your ministry council, you need to go back and tell them to be praying about it, because we need those folks that will come. And we don't care for 29, as long as they're qualified to do the work. And if you've got ideas of who that might be, I believe everybody knows my email. You've seen it for years and years and years, chickenhouse@yatel.net. You ought to have it everywhere. Please send me the names, and when the nominating committee comes together, we'll start doing the work of trying to develop a new executive group for ministry council. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for being here today. You've given up 2 Saturdays, and that's unheard of in T-ball season. Thank you so much. David Hobson, would you pray us for a safe journey home?
Heavenly Father, we know your strength is there. Help us to pay attention. Help us to feel your hand on us, guiding us, encouraging us, we might do the same to others. For Christ's sake, we do pray.